Fractured Lies, Daughter of Sea and Sky, Book 3, written by AR Colbert, narrated by Jennifer Groberg. Part 1, Finding Atlantis. Chapter 1. My cheek was wet and smashed up against the moist fabric of my too-hard pillow. I reached up to wipe the drool from my face, licking my dry lips and choking on my own morning breath. My neck ached, my back was sore, and I gasped as everything from the night before came crashing back into my memory. I didn't want to open my eyes, because it would only confirm what I feared was true. My pillow moved, and Tate's chuckle warmed me as he pushed a strand of hair off of my forehead. I lifted one lid and saw his golden eyes glistening with amusement as he stared back down at me. "It's about time you woke up. It would be a shame to survive the storm only to drown in your drool." I punched him in the wet spot on his arm and sat up to find that everyone was right as I'd left them the night before, huddled together in the stone hallway that adjoined Driscoll's cliffside shelter and the lighthouse at the top of the hill. It had seemed the safest place to hide and try to catch some sleep. Between the fire damage above ground and the towering waves that crashed into the windows of Driscoll's shelter in the side of the cliff. After a quick head count to ensure each of my friends was still with us, I stood and stretched my aching muscles. The hall was still dark, but a faint gray light shone through from the shelter windows overlooking the ocean below. It was morning here in Scotland. How late did that make it back in New York? "Devon," I extended a hand to the boy beside Tate. "How are you feeling?" "Much better this morning." "Strong enough to get us all back home?" He cast a quick glance at Sean, who returned a subtle nod. Yeah, probably. But maybe I should start with just one person to make sure. I'd hate to get us all stranded in New Jersey or something because I can't make it back with the group. You want to go first?" I nodded. "Sure. Do you need to eat or anything before we go?" I fished around for the granola bar buried in the bottom of my bag, and my fingers tingled as they made contact with the piece of stone tablet tucked away inside. "No, I'm good." "All right, see you all in a minute," I said to my weary-looking group of friends. Devon held out a hand, and I grabbed onto it, bracing myself for the cold I would feel as he transported me through reality and back into our apartment in New York. But there was nothing that could prepare me for the intensity of it. It was even colder than I remembered, so chilling I thought my bones might freeze and crack if I were there any longer than the millisecond it took to teleport. My eyes squinted in the darkness of our new location, and still shivering, I turned to Devon. "Thanks." "Yep, you got it. Bye." The words fell quickly out of his mouth. "Wait!" He was gone, already through the fabric of reality. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the lack of light, I realized I was not in my apartment, but in a different familiar room. That scoundrel! "Everly?" My Aunt Millie sat up in her king-sized bed, pushing an eye mask up onto her forehead. I could barely see her over the mountain of pillows surrounding her small frame, but she definitely saw me. "You're glowing! What time is it? Is everything okay?" A couple of pillows tumbled to the plush area rug under her bed as she swung her legs around to get a glimpse at the clock on her nightstand. It was 2 a.m. "What is going on?" I looked around, expecting Devon and some of the others to zap back in here and help me out, but they didn't come. It was just me and my very sleepy, very concerned aunt. Had he teleported here by accident? The thought that he might know my Aunt Millie's bedroom so well made me shudder, soulmates or not. Or had he dropped me off here on purpose? I suspected the latter, seeing as how he bolted the second my feet touched the ground. "Everly!" Millie's voice had turned stern, drawing my attention back to her. How was I going to get out of this? Maybe we should go downstairs and brew some tea, I suggested. This could take a while. She nodded, sliding her feet into some fluffy slippers and pulling on a silky robe. Was that Devon who dropped you off? Yes. She padded toward the stairs behind me. A million thoughts raced through my mind. I hadn't intended to tell Millie about my powers just yet, and I definitely hadn't planned to mention the prophecy until I understood more about it. But now that I was here, I wasn't sure how I would get out without spilling everything. How long have you had your powers? Her eyes brushed over me, examining the white aura that emanated from my skin. A few days. Ugh, Devon could have at least warned me he was throwing me into this. Care to elaborate? I paused on the stairs, turning to face her. I think you should be sitting for this. Let's get that tea going, and I will explain everything. 30 minutes later, Millie looked even more exhausted than before. She rested with her elbows on the countertop, forehead in the palms of her hands. I half wondered if she'd heard a word I'd said, because she hadn't made a sound the entire time I spoke. I'd explained how my powers emerged while Osborne chased me, Tate's suspicions about the prophecy, our trip to Scotland, the storm's reaction to my powers, and Driscoll. She didn't say a word. The only thing I didn't mention was Rasputin. Not that I could have, even if I'd wanted to with that curse he placed on me. Finally, she lifted her weary eyes and sighed. Oh, Tilly. I set my cup down hard on the counter. What does any of this have to do with my mom? Millie just shook her head. I knew her secrets were going to get the best of her, but I never would have guessed about any of this. Do you have any idea where she might be? Millie pursed her lips. No. Well, probably not. Probably? A noise in the kitchen doorway stopped the conversation from moving any further. Devon's nervously grinning face peeked around the corner. Hi. I scowled, but Millie smiled widely. I was hoping you'd be back, she said. Waving him into the kitchen, she chuckled. You may as well bring the others in, too. I know you've got them with you. With a sheepish shrug, Devon entered the room, followed by Sean, Dom, Gayla, and Tate. How long have you guys been here? I demanded. And why didn't you tell me you were abandoning me to explain everything to my aunt alone? I did tell you I would have to inform her about all of this eventually. I just thought it would be better coming from you. Devon looked sincerely apologetic. Besides, this is getting too big for us to handle on our own. I thought we could use her help. He was right, of course, but I didn't want to admit it. Driscoll came around the corner next, eyes wide with astonishment. He probably hadn't been off the island in a century. Part of me was surprised to see that he'd survived the trip with Devon. The curse should have killed him. But then another part of me knew it was all somehow related to my new aura and the tablet. Just because I didn't yet know how to wield the power it provided me didn't negate the fact that it was some seriously strong stuff. Having more power than the Keeper curse that had kept Driscoll imprisoned for so long was both exhilarating and terrifying. I just hoped I'd be able to use it for good. Hallo, Driscoll said in his rough German accent. Millie let out a startled squeak. I'll boil some more tea, she mumbled. We've got some figuring out to do. Chapter 2. Once everyone was fully caffeinated, we headed upstairs into Millie's study. Watching Driscoll take in his surroundings was like watching a child explore a new classroom on their first day of school. This was a foreign and strange world to him, but there was enough familiarity to drum up excitement that radiated from him with every step he took. How long have you been trapped on that island? I asked, as we filed into the study. Since December of 1900. I suppose a lot has changed since then. He walked over to the window and stared out at the quiet Manhattan street below. It was scattered with parked cars and tall glowing streetlights, but there really wasn't much activity on Millie's Street at 3:30 in the morning. You could say that. Millie cleared her desk while Sean and Tate pushed a couple of chairs closer to the small sofa that sat in the room. Dom and Gayla pulled me off to one side while the others worked. You okay? Dom asked. I think so. Millie took the news as well as she could, I think. Dom glanced over to where my aunt was now whispering with Devon, and a frown tugged at her lips. She's not handling it as well as she's letting on. She's pretty concerned about you and what this might mean. We all are, Gayla said. I wish I could jump right into another vision and tell you what to expect next. I'd do it if I could. I know you would. I surveyed the room, and my gaze snagged on Tate. He watched me with those gorgeous golden eyes, sending a flutter through my chest against my will. Everything had happened so fast, I still didn't have a good grasp of what it all meant. All I knew for certain was that despite everyone telling me to keep my distance, the one thing I wanted was to wrap myself in Tate's arms and have him tell me everything would be okay. I shook the thought from my mind, and we joined everyone else in the center of the room. Driscoll plopped himself down to the couch, and his mouth made a small O shape. He raised up and fell back again, grinning as the plush cushions bounced him back into place once more. Then he pulled a soft gray blanket from the back on the sofa and began to unfold it. So, Millie said, immediately taking command of the room. First things first, we need to unravel everything you know about this prophecy. We all turned back to Driscoll, who was still fumbling with the blanket. How big is this thing? It's 10 feet by 10 feet, Millie grinned. It's my giant blanket, special ordered. Isn't it delightful? Driscoll's bushy brows furrowed. Are all blankets this large now? No. I stood and snapped the blanket wide in the air so that it fell over both him and Gayla, who sat beside him on the sofa. He turned and lifted his brows at her playfully, eliciting a loud groan from my friend. Can we please get back to the prophecy? Yes, sorry. Driscoll cleared his throat and launched into the same information he'd told us at the lighthouse. Millie nodded along as he spoke, and when he finished she asked, And what about you? Me? Driscoll shook his head. What about me? I am not the deliverer. It has nothing to do with me. But the curse was for you. It's either been broken or breached. Either way, the royalty will know, and they will come looking for you. You can't stay here. It's too dangerous. You'll have to get out of New York. Driscoll scratched his head, as though the thought hadn't occurred to him. Where do you suggest he goes? Sean asked. Something had shifted in him since we landed on the island in Scotland. He sat taller, more focused, eyes clear. Sean was in guardian mode, and it was clear that this was what he was made for. Porta Maris, Millie said. That's a terrible idea. Driscoll stood, and his enormous blanket pooled at his feet. You might as well serve me up on a silver platter. Millie sighed. Hear me out. Porta Maris is not a part of any sovereign nation, which is good. You can't exactly go seeking asylum in another territory. They all want your head. But I know some guys. I laughed. You know some guys? That's how every bad crime drama starts. No, really. They'll keep him safe. She looked at Devon as though she expected him to chime in, but he was silent. Devon looked as clueless as I felt. Okay, so where is this Porta Maris? I asked. It's in the Caribbean, Millie said. In the Bermuda Triangle. Driscoll scoffed and waved a hand in the air before plopping back down on the couch with a bounce. The gateway to Atlantis, Sean said softly. There was no denying the reverence in his tone. I'm out, Gayla raised both hands in the air. That's a little too risky for me. I kind of feel like staying alive for a little while longer. What are you talking about? I turned from Gayla back to Millie. Is it dangerous? The gateways are designed to keep anyone out of the territories who doesn't belong there. So yes, technically for non-Atlanteans it could be dangerous. But Driscoll is Atlantean. That doesn't make it safe. He crossed his arms over his chest. Well, I'm Atlantean. I'll take you, Driscoll. You already know that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. My chest tightened as I recalled the oath I'd made on the island. Right, Millie said. That brings us to the next issue we need to get figured out. Your aura. I'd almost forgotten about that. It was difficult to remember when I couldn't even see it myself. But the looks on all the other faces in the room reminded me that they could definitely see it, and it was not as easy for them to forget. I found a way to hide it, Tate said. It worked when we went to the library. Millie smiled, but I knew her well enough to see that it wasn't sincere. Was she skeptical of Tate's intentions as well? That's great, but Everly needs to do more than hide it. She needs it to be blue. We want to let everyone know she's Atlantean without revealing too much else. Also, she needs to be able to move about freely without you by her side. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily mind having Tate by my side 24/7, but I understood her point. I do think I can use your help, though. Meet me down at the apothecary and... A knock sounded at the door. Millie? Jeeves's voice was laced with concern. Are you okay? I thought I heard a man's voice. The color drained from my aunt's face. I'm fine, just getting started with work a little early. Her response was strained, but I wondered if Jeeves would pick up on it. Hopefully he'd take her word and be on his way. There wouldn't be any easy way to explain why she was holed up in her study with a random group of college students and an old, hairy German man in the middle of the night. Make that dawn, I noted, as I took in the gray light shining through the window. Okay, Jeeves hesitated. Then I'll be right up with some coffee. Pierre has breakfast started already, too. He hurried down the hall, and Millie faced us with big, round eyes. You guys have to go. Devon, can you get them back to their apartment? Devon grimaced. Usually, yes, but I used up everything I had teleporting them all here. It'll be a bit before I have my strength back. It's fine, I stood. I'll just let Jeeves know I stayed the night. He'll assume you were talking to me. I cleared my throat and dropped my tone a few octaves. I have a manly voice. Gayla snorted, and I rushed over to the door. I'd meet Jeeves in the hallway and stop him before he entered the room. Hopefully seeing me would ease any of his suspicions. He wasn't exactly a bodyguard, but he was a previous college linebacker, and that was as close to personal security as a butler could be. If he suspected any foul play going on in the study, he wouldn't hesitate before busting in and coming to Millie's rescue. I had to play it cool and make him believe everything was fine. I twisted the knob and found Jeeves already standing in the hallway again, with a tray holding a coffee carafe and a yogurt parfait. Everly! He took a startled step back. I didn't know you were here. Yeah, I coughed and dropped my voice lower again. I had some studying to do, and it got too late for me to go back to my apartment. I'll take that. He glanced at my outstretched hands with a frown and pulled the tray in closer. I've got it. Jeeves looked more concerned than ever as he scanned me in the hall. I followed his eyes down to my clothing and found myself looking like I'd just completed a mud run. Shoot. I'd been struck by lightning, tied up with ropes, laid down on the soggy ground, and then slept in a stone hallway. This was not the effect I was going for. Are you sure everything is okay in there? He pushed past me and froze after stepping through the doorway into the study. I swallowed and peeked round his large frame, already thinking through what kind of story I could tell him to make this seem normal. But all we saw in the room was Millie and Devon cuddled up on the couch with that enormous blanket sprawled out all around them. I stifled a laugh, picturing all of my friends hidden underneath in that cramped space with old man Driscoll. Sorry," Jeeves stammered, and quickly set the tray on Millie's desk, avoiding eye contact with her the best he could. "I didn't realize you had company." He turned his back on them and gave me a look that said he clearly did not approve of my aunt's relationship with Devon. Oh, Jeeves, if only you knew the truth. I bit my lip and nodded thanks to him. "We won't need any more coffee, Jeeves. Thanks, though. We'll be out of here soon." He just shook his head as he hurried out of the room. I locked the door behind him and turned back toward a very grumpy group of people emerging from under the blanket on the floor. Gayla's hair was alive with static, and Driscoll tried to calm it with his hairy hands. I couldn't keep it in anymore. A laugh bubbled up out of my chest and escaped through the room. I was the deliverer. I was going to save the world. It was the craziest thing I'd ever heard of, but at least I would get to do it with this ragtag crew of mine. Chapter 3. It turned out teleportation could leave me feeling just as jet-lagged as an airplane could. I found myself dragging through Millie's house, ready to let my head hit the pillow by supper time. But Jeeves and Pierre didn't know that I'd traveled halfway across the world. They wouldn't understand that I had somehow stopped a deadly storm with nothing but my bare hands and some kind of savage yell. All they knew was that something strange was going on. "I don't like it." Pierre's French accent grew even thicker when he was worked up about something, and judging by the speed of his chopping, he was pretty worked up. He and Jeeves had been giving Millie the side-eye all day, ever since Jeeves caught her snuggling up with Devon on the couch that morning. And to make matters worse, Devon didn't leave with the others. He stayed behind instead to help Millie get Driscoll secretly set up in a spare bedroom. Thankfully, the butler and chef didn't know about Driscoll, thanks to an enchantment Tate had put into place that kept them oblivious to his presence. Devon was bad enough. There was no telling what they'd say if they caught a glimpse of my favorite cursed old man. "It's weird, right?" Jeeves grabbed a piece of the green bell pepper on Pierre's cutting board and popped it into his mouth. "I mean, technically it's legal, but he's like 19. And how old is Millie? 40? Actually, she was 426 years old. But who was counting? "Maybe it's true love," I shrugged. They didn't know the half of it. "People are going to talk." Pierre gave one final chop with enough force to rattle the countertop. He met my eyes and lowered his voice. "And if he thinks he's going to move into our home and order me around, he can walk right back out the door." His knife waved through the air, enunciating his words with sharp jabs, forcing me to lean out of his way until he was done talking. "Oh, give him a chance. He's not moving in." I reached for a veggie. "Maybe he'll grow on you. It's been so long since Millie has fallen for someone." Pierre scoffed and swatted my hand away. "He is a child, and as for Millie, mieux vaut être qu'elle se m'a accompagnée." "Do I even want to know what that means?" I whispered to Jeeves. He shrugged. "All I know is that I saw a movie like this on TV once with Mama." Jeeves's Alabama twang was almost comical after Pierre's rant. Over his shoulder, through the kitchen window, I saw a quick flash of white. "There was this rich widow, real pretty lady, who fell for her pool boy and—" "I'll be right back, guys." I interrupted Jeeves to get a closer look at what I hoped had flown by the window. Pierre shot me a dirty look, but Jeeves kept right on with his story as I casually made my way back out into the foyer. Tiny Tim and Lemon Drop, Millie's giant mastiffs, rose from their beds under the stairs and trotted after me toward the back door. "You two have to stay inside," I whispered. Things didn't go so great the last time they'd seen my owl. Sorry, guys. Their droopy eyes made them look like they were pouting. I'll be quick. I slid through the glass doors into Millie's small courtyard off the back of her house, and sure enough, my feathery friend was perched up on the railing. Al! It's Alpheus. He somehow sounded irritated without even making any actual noise. Right, Alpheus. I was just happy to see him. He hadn't been around since the night I met with Rasputin at the cathedral. Then again, maybe I was the one who hadn't been around much. Al probably had no idea what was going on. I'm glad to see you survived the deadly grip of the Manticorian Lord. I laughed. Wow, you make that sound intense. Well, he tried to kill you before. When? I heard a groan in my head, and Al shifted his little owl feet across the wrought iron. He was so cute, it was difficult to take him seriously. It always surprises me that you can't remember your previous lives. Yeah, you've mentioned something like that before, but you're going to have to be a little more direct. I don't know what you're talking about. Does this have anything to do with that oath you mentioned the last time I saw you? Because I do understand keeper oaths a little more now. I've even made one of my own. If owls could shake their heads to make a person feel like an idiot, that is exactly what Al would have been doing in that moment. Yes, I made an oath to you in your first life, and I've been forced to carry it out in this ridiculous bird body ever since. You haven't always been an owl? Of course not. His head twisted to one side. What happened? It's not important. Not anymore. The point is, I am sworn to protect you through all of your days, no matter how many times your soul returns to the earth, even when you return looking like that. I glanced down at my running tights and oversized t-shirt. What's wrong with... You know what? Never mind. Back to the topic. You're telling me that you knew me before? Same soul, different body? Bodies, plural. And yes. Al, that's great! Alpheus. So how do I normally handle this whole white aura situation? Like, what did I do in previous lives? There's never been a white aura situation to handle before. You mean this is new? Please, tell me everything you know, anything that could help me. I'm obviously not going to review the last few millennia with you, but I'll give you the basics. You were Bernice when we first met. You were a stunning woman, but cold-hearted. Not many people cared for you in those days. But you did. I never said that. Regardless of your pleasantness or lack thereof, you were powerful. Something happened in those days. You never told me what, but it was serious enough that you believed your life to be in danger. I owed you a favor, so you asked for my oath of protection. I've been by your side ever since, stuck for an eternity in this frail body, destined to serve you despite your natural strength. I never understood why. Wow, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I shuffled my feet, trying to make sense of it all. So, do you still have powers of your own? His large yellow eyes closed for a long moment. No. But you don't need me for that anyway. You've always been very powerful. It's how you earned your nickname from the mortals in a later life. What was my nickname? They called you the goddess of wisdom and war. Like Athena? He cocked his fluffy head at a 90-degree angle and blinked. I swear it's like speaking to a toddler sometimes. Yes, like Athena. He mumbled to himself, the words muffled in my brain. You were Athena. I was a goddess? You've got to be kidding me. No, you weren't a goddess. There are no such things as gods and goddesses. There is only one god. But the humans back then were just as stupid as they are today, and they believed you were a goddess. Hey now, let's knock it off with the name-calling. Fine. He shifted his taloned toes again. I'll be nice. Yes, you were Athena. You have always had a sharp mind and a fierceness in battle. That has remained true in every incarnation. So what does that mean for me today? Battle skills aren't exactly useful in today's society. You might be surprised. Look, I don't know what you're supposed to do. I've never really known. I just know that you're destined for greatness. You told me as much thousands of years ago, but you always figure it out. Just lean into your natural instincts and find what is right. Fight for it. You've got the strength. You just need to believe it. And you'll help me? However I can. Great. Then I have a favor to ask. I need you to locate someone for me. Someone who may have the answers I need. Who? I chuckled. What's so funny? Al the owl just said who? I can't do this anymore. He lifted his wings. Wait, I'm sorry. I really do need your help, though. You see, there's this prophecy. I'll explain the details later, but it's kind of a big deal, and I'm pretty sure we're not the only ones who know about it. There's a very powerful keeper who may be able to fill in some blanks and possibly even lead me to my mom. If it's true that I have the courage and fight of Athena, then it's time for me to put on my big girl pants and face my fears. I took a deep breath and looked Al in the eyes. I need to find Russell. Chapter 4. Devon left later that evening, and Tate swung by the next morning. It was embarrassing how excited I was to see his face. The only thing that might have made it better would have been another one of those cinnamon lattes he'd gotten into the habit of bringing me from the honey pot. But there was no coffee today. Tate was on a mission, focused on one thing and one thing only, turning my aura blue. Oddly enough, my presence wasn't required for it. He'd barely given me a wave before trotting up the stairs to meet Millie in her study. Abby was at the apothecary today, so they wouldn't be able to speak freely there. They decided to experiment with some different ideas here in Millie's study instead. Maybe you should go be a chaperone, Jeeves whispered as he joined me in the foyer. Millie's first teenage boyfriend might be upset to find out she's spending time with another teenage boyfriend. Tate's 20. I couldn't even make eye contact with Jeeves. My gaze was still glued to the outside of the door to Millie's study. I felt surprisingly lonely, even surrounded by everyone in the house. It was strange to know that everyone was working on this grand plan that centered around me, and yet I felt completely useless. That's hardly any better, Jeeves muttered. After a pause, he elbowed me in the arm. Hey, are you all right? Yeah, of course. Why? I plastered a smile on my face. Judging by Jeeves's reaction, I overdid it. The corners of his mouth dropped, and he rested a heavy hand on my shoulder. Oh no, you like this one, don't you? No, His expression hardened. Look, your aunt is a pretty lady, but this is too far. She should not be going after young men at all, especially not those who have already caught the eyes of another Gordon woman. I'll go have a talk with her. He pushed toward the stairs, and I grabbed his arm, slowing him down. Stopping a former college linebacker should have been difficult, but I brought his 250-pound body to a halt with ease. Even previous Bama players were no match for my new keeper strength. Jeeves quirked a brow at me. It's fine, I sighed. I'll go be a chaperone. I took my time going up the stairs and paused for a long minute outside of the study. A quick glance over my shoulder back to the foyer below revealed a determined Jeeves, nodding his encouragement for me to go in. I rolled my shoulders back and gave a soft knock on the door. Yes? Millie's voice called out. She sounded distracted. Of course, I knew there was nothing going on between her and Tate, but I was still admittedly a little jealous that everyone was getting to hang out without me. It's me. Can I come in? Yes, of course. Tate and Millie were hunched over her desk, a pile of books off to one side, and a couple of jars of dried herbs stacked beside them. "How's it going so far?" Tate moved to the side, making a spot for me to join them. I felt the tug toward him with every step I took, and he looked up with surprise as my elbow brushed against his. He must have felt the same jolt of electricity that I did when we touched. "It's good, I think," he amended, as he glanced up at the worry lines etching Millie's face. "We're getting close. Maybe." "I just don't think the power amplification drought is exactly what we're looking for. Too much of that will be taxing on her body, and she doesn't need amplification right now." Millie frowned. "We don't know that more Atlantean power will make the aura turn blue anyway," Tate said. "It could make it glow a brighter white." They continued to work as though I wasn't in the room. I nodded along, waiting for my chance to add something of value. "But you can't just follow her around with a curtain of glamour forever. There's got to be a way to keep it intact without your presence. Maybe if you enchanted a charm or some kind of jewelry she could keep on herself." Tate shook his head. "I can't glamour inanimate objects. There has to be some life." He expanded on it, going deep into some kind of Agarthian science I couldn't even begin to understand. I tried to keep up for a while, but there wasn't anything I could add to the conversation without first taking some kind of Keeper Physics 101 class. I was useless, once again. "All right, well, I'm going to go back to something." Millie nodded and waved, never pulling her eyes away from the textbook laid open before her. Tate didn't look up either. They were fully engrossed in their work, which was a good thing, I supposed. I just wished I could do something to help. I left them to their business and slipped out into the hallway in search of Driscoll. There probably wasn't any more information he could provide. We'd gone over all the details 1,000,000 times already, but at least we could keep each other company while we were essentially prisoners in Millie's house. Though if I had to be a prisoner, a multi-million-dollar townhouse in Manhattan, complete with a butler and private chef, was a pretty good place to serve my sentence. Driscoll's room was down the hall. As I neared it, I could just make out the sound of him singing. I knocked on the door, but it wasn't latched all the way. It swung open as my knuckles met the wood, and the room was empty. To the right, I noticed light shining from under his bathroom door. His singing was louder now, some kind of upbeat German folk song layered with the sound of a draining bathtub. I had no idea what his lyrics meant, but it sounded like he was enjoying himself. Feeling mopey and alone once again, I let him be and peeked out the open window at the end of the hall. It was warm for an autumn day, and the breeze blowing in from outside reminded me that I hadn't even seen Al since I'd sent him on to find Rossel. Hopefully Rossel hadn't hurt him. Then again, Al had been alive for thousands of years. I wasn't so sure anything could hurt him. A pounding came from the front door downstairs. "Millie, your shop girl said you were working from home today. Are you in there?" Claudia's voice rang out through the door, followed by more pounding. I hadn't seen her in ages, not since Sean and I first left to meet Gayla, and I wasn't about to let her see me now with a white glow. "Millie!" she called out again. She sounded flustered. I ran down the hall to tell my aunt, nearly colliding with Tate as he stepped out of the study with a panicked look on his face. "We've got to hide you," he said. I glanced downstairs again to find Jeeves making his way through the foyer to greet our guest. "Hurry!" Millie whisper yelled from over Tate's shoulder. "And hide Driscoll, too. Claudia can't know about any of this." Tate gently took hold of my wrist and guided me back down the hall to Driscoll's room. But the door was now closed, and Driscoll's voice was louder as he hummed on the other side. Tate didn't hesitate to twist the knob, but it was locked. "Driscoll, let us in." "1 minute, please. I have just bathed, and I am moisturizing." Jeeves opened the door and greeted Claudia downstairs. "Is Millie home?" she asked impatiently. Yeah, she's upstairs in the study. I looked back down the hall to see a wide-eyed Millie shooing me away gently with 2 hands. I shrugged and mouthed, "It's locked." Tate whispered through the door, "All right, Driscoll, just be quiet. We have company." Thank goodness Claudia was complaining loudly as she made her way up the stairs. Otherwise, she would have heard him for sure. But Tate and I were still trapped in plain sight at the end of the hall, and Claudia's footsteps were growing closer. "Millie, darling, I hope you don't mind me barging in, but I have to vent about the council to someone. They are on my last nerve." Claudia's whiny voice carried from halfway up the stairs. I glanced back at the window, wondering if we could survive a jump outside, down into Millie's courtyard. But Tate yanked me across the hall into a linen closet before I could make my move. The door closed silently behind us, right as we overheard Claudia reach the top of the stairs. "There you are!" she exclaimed. "Whatever is the matter, Millie? You look like you've seen a ghost." For a moment, all of my awareness was focused on my breathing, trying to bring it down into a slow and steady rhythm that couldn't be heard out in the hall. But then my body reminded me of how close I was to Tate. We were practically wrapped around each other, a tangle of limbs, as he held himself upright with arms extended over my shoulders against the wall behind me. My nose couldn't have been a full inch away from his Adam's apple, and I became acutely aware of his breathing and racing pulse. The air seemed to sizzle around us, the skin on my left knee prickling where it rested against Tate's leg. I couldn't move it away because of how the shelves pressed hard into the outside of my thigh. "Yeah, of course I'm fine," Millie's voice rang out from the hall, followed by a nervous laugh. "You're having problems with the council again? Come, let's talk about it in the study." I reached for the door handle, anxious to put some space between me and Tate. If I didn't get away from him soon, I might wrap my arms around him and never let go. And that didn't seem like a wise decision. "Wait." Tate's whisper was barely audible. I might have missed it if not for my better keeper hearing and the rustle of his breath in my hair. "I just don't know what to do anymore," Claudia despaired. She strode down the hall, and I watched with dread as her shadow passed under the crack of the door, pausing just outside of where we stood, likely stopping to look out the same window I'd been eyeballing moments earlier. When she spoke again, her voice was louder. "They're asking too much of him. There is just no way." "Claudia," Millie's voice was stern, "I must insist that we take this conversation back into the study." She dropped into a whisper. "The help may overhear you." A charley horse was developing in my thigh where it was still shoved against the shelf. I shifted slightly to ease the cramp and inadvertently bumped my toe against a basket of cleaning supplies tucked under the shelves on the floor. The movement was small, but it was just enough to knock one bottle of cleaner over into another, causing a soft tap where the plastic bottles met. Tate's arms instinctively dropped, and he pulled me toward him, pressing our bodies together. My cheek smushed against his chest, where his heart was beating as fast and hard as mine. And in this position, with our bodies placed perfectly together, as though we were formed from the same mold, 2 pieces of the same puzzle, the burning, tingling, prickling sensation stopped. It just felt right. "Did you hear something?" Claudia asked. Tate's hands pulled me against him even tighter to keep me quiet. Or maybe it was because he felt the same undeniable pull towards me that I felt toward him. "It was probably just Jeeves downstairs," Millie said quickly. "I told you, we need to get back into the study so we can speak freely." "Right." Claudia hesitated for just a moment longer before following my aunt down the hall. Neither Tate nor I moved even a millimeter until we heard the click of the study door. Then he couldn't get our door open fast enough. "See ya," he whispered. I peeked out of the closet just in time to see him slip out of the window. He jumped down to the courtyard with ease and disappeared over the side of the fence. Driscoll's door opened then, and his bushy brows lifted at the sight of me. "Why are you all red?" "I don't know," I whispered. My heart still pounded in my chest, a mixture of nerves over my close call with Claudia and something else. I peered out the window again, hoping to catch one more glimpse of my Agarthian prince. No, not my Agarthian prince. He was just Tate, just a guy I needed to look out for, a master manipulator and potentially a man who could destroy the prophecy before we even got started. "Well, come in," Driscoll interrupted my thoughts. "You can wait with me until the woman is gone." Chapter 5. Tate was back the next morning, but I made no attempt to talk to him this time. I tossed and turned all night, thinking over the effect his nearness had on me. I'd even gathered a few books from Millie's secret stash of keeper text to try to understand my reaction to him a little better. Though it wasn't common, there had been a few reports throughout history of Agarthian sirens whose mere proximity could move their victims to submission. Most of the stories were from back before they developed the technology currently used to extract souls, so they still relied on archaic means of removing life back then. It was where rumors of vampires began. Apparently, these insanely attractive men and women would identify fractured souls and lure them alone, where they would extract the victim's souls through a fatal puncture wound via their teeth in the neck. Typically, they used the same glamour that was still so effective today, but occasionally no glamour was needed at all. The closer the vampires got, the more willing their victims became. I refused to let Tate suck the life out of me like a vampire, even if it was only figuratively. I needed to maintain strict control over my actions and remain clear-headed. It was time to put some distance between us. That was a lot easier said than done when he spent so many hours hanging out at Millie's house. And though I had protested and made what I thought was a really compelling argument to go back to my apartment with Gayla and Dom, the majority ruled against me. They wanted me to stay here with Driscoll, off the streets and away from anyone who might catch a glimpse of my white aura. That meant hours and hours in the same house as Tate. After another pouty lunch with Jeeves and Pierre, I was startled to hear Millie's voice call out from the stairs. "Everly, come here!" Her excitement was palpable. Had they figured something out? I tried to put some energy into my steps, but I wasn't eager to see Tate again. I couldn't be trusted to control myself around him. Millie took my hand as I reached the top of the stairs and anxiously pulled me into her study. "We did it!" She closed the door behind her and clapped her hands together. "You found a way to conceal my aura?" "Not conceal it," Tate's voice called out from the opposite wall. He'd placed himself as far from the doorway as possible. "But change it to blue." "No way!" My shoulders relaxed as the impact of the news overshadowed my earlier concerns about Tate. If they could turn my aura blue, I would be free to leave the house again. I could even use my powers around other keepers, and no one would be any wiser. Millie nodded, her grin stretching from ear to ear. "It's true. We think, anyway. Everything adds up on paper, but obviously we need to test it on you to be sure." A jar sat atop Millie's desk, containing a muddy brown, paste-like substance in the bottom. I eyed the goop suspiciously. "Are you sure it's safe?" "Of course." Millie's smile stayed strong, but there was a definitive twitch in her eye. "But even if it's not, you happen to be in the presence of a very skilled healer." She took a bow. "And I promise not to let anything hurt you." Tate moved forward just a few steps, carefully keeping Millie's couch between us. We found a way to infuse one of Millie's concoctions here with some of my glamour. I thought you couldn't glamour inanimate objects. Tate held up a finger and smirked. I can't glamour unliving objects, but technically, plants are living. He enchanted my kava. Millie gestured toward a bowl full of heart-shaped green leaves. It acts as a booster for some of the other herbs I've muddled together here in the jar. We hypothesize that the enchantment will stay with the leaves, even after they are pulled from the plant and dried. It only has to be living when the spell is initially cast. When used with an Atlantean amplifier and a hefty dose of borage for the blue color inducer, we think we should be able to make your aura appear blue. And taking a constant amplifier won't be damaging? I remembered her warning from the day before. Millie shifted on her feet. I've done my best to counteract those effects as well, but I would caution you to only consume this when you absolutely need to go out in public. I frowned, turning the jar around in my hand. I would still be a prisoner most of the time, sentenced to remain locked up in this house as much as possible. But at least it wouldn't be forever. Go on. Millie handed me a soup spoon. If it works, I will put it into capsules to make it easier to transport and consume. But for the test, just take a small amount in the spoon here. My gaze drifted momentarily to Tate, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. That wasn't reassuring. But my aunt wouldn't do anything to harm me. I believed that with my whole heart. I mentally counted to 3, then shoved half a spoonful of the disgusting brown mash into my mouth and swallowed before my tongue could register just how bitter and nasty the stuff was. Blah! Is there any way to make it taste better? Once it's in the capsules, it... Millie's words cut off, and her hands flew to her mouth with a gasp. What? I looked down, but saw nothing. I felt nothing either. What is it? It worked, Tate smirked. I knew it would. Am I blue? I raised the back of my hand closer to my eyes for better inspection. A gorgeous cerulean. Millie clapped her hands together. Well done, Thaddeus. It wasn't just me. Tate dropped his chin and ran a hand through his dark, tousled hair. Then he turned those glistening golden eyes on me. How are you feeling, Ev? I wiggled my fingers. I feel exactly the same. What does an amplifier do, exactly? It enhances your natural powers, Millie said, which in your case, well, is still undetermined. Undetermined. I could stop storms and breathe underwater, but both of those could still be related to standard Atlantean abilities to control and manipulate water. I couldn't heal or teleport or run faster or jump higher like the others. My powers were undetermined. Well, I obviously didn't inherit my mom's abilities. Perhaps I got my dad's powers. Millie frowned. Since our souls are reincarnated, we don't exactly inherit powers from our parents. And even if we did, I've told you, I truly do not know who your father is. Your mother has always been a fierce secret keeper. It's one reason she was so valued as a messenger. Right. Then I guess I'll just have to add search for long-lost father to my ever-growing to-do list. Who knows? Maybe he'll stumble across my path when I go to Atlantis to find another part of the prophecy. Oh! Millie turned back to the desk and shuffled around through some papers. That reminds me, there was something positive that came out of Claudia's impromptu visit yesterday. I got some good intel on where the royal prisons are located. What? The secret ones in Atlantis? Did she know if my mom was there? Millie grimaced. I couldn't ask her that, and this is vague at best. But Sean's dad works with the Atlantean Council. He's a guardian, like Sean, but his work is confidential. I know he doesn't work in the common prison, but I definitely heard her mention prisoners in her frustrated rant session yesterday. I also happen to know that he works beneath the palace. There's a real palace? Under the sea? Yes. I sighed and looked up at the ceiling. I wish I could be part of your world. Millie shot me a disapproving look. She obviously didn't appreciate my cartoon mermaid humor. I can only assume it's the royal prison. So how do we get there? Well, I refuse to let you go anywhere until we've had more time to test this aura-changing amplifier. But it certainly won't be easy when you do go. You can't access it from outside of the palace. And if the queen is anything like my father, she won't let you into the palace without a really good reason. I'd almost forgotten Tate was still in the room. If anyone knew about breaking into royal keeper palaces and prisons, it would be him. He was an Agarthian prince, after all. So what do we do then? First, we keep an eye on the effects of this medicine. We'll worry about devising a plan into Atlantis once we know you can safely leave the house. Little did she know, I was already devising my plan. But there were a few things I had to take care of first. My gaze drifted to the window, wondering if Al had made it back yet. Now that my aura was blue, I definitely needed to find Russell. Chapter 6. The medicine, or potion as I like to call it, Millie hated that word, stayed effective for just over 30 hours, which seemed pretty remarkable to me, but Millie thought we could do better. She and Tate continued to experiment over the next week until they reached a product both were satisfied with. I had a potion pill that would keep my aura blue for 2 solid days. It was supposedly an amplifier, but since I had no discernible power to amplify, I didn't see any effects on that front. Maybe I could swim faster, but I hadn't tried. Without the amplification in use, it also meant that the pills didn't seem to have any draining effects on me when they wore off. They did their job. My aura was blue, and that was all that was necessary for me to get out of the house. And get out I did. It felt good to walk back onto campus with Gayla and Dom. "Is it still blue?" I muttered out of the side of my mouth. "Yep," Gayla grinned. "You look just like one of us, just like a keeper." I looked like one of them, but I wasn't really. They still considered me different. The image of my friends all bowing before me on the island where we found Driscoll was a memory I'd tried hard to burn from my brain. I didn't want to be different. The girls did a good job of making me feel normal for the most part, but every once in a while I would see a strange expression dance across Gayla's face, or Dom's eyebrows would turn up in a way that reminded me of how they truly saw me. I wasn't one of them. I would never be one of them. But I certainly didn't feel like anyone special. Thankfully, the other keepers on campus didn't see me as anything special either. I was just an average Atlantean girl in their eyes, and yet it still wasn't enough to ease the glares I got from the group of Agarthian girls we shared our review of the ancient languages class with. Camille, the siren, who'd lured me into a trap after the girls saw me with Clayton, feigned a look of smug indifference as I passed her group on my way to class, but it still sent a chill down my spine. I wouldn't let her know it, though. I smiled sweetly and gave a little wave. She rolled her eyes and turned back to her cat-shifter friend and the wind-wielder to her left. "They're brats," Gayla shrugged. "Don't let them get to you. You look great." She nodded toward the library. "This is where I've got a split. We still meeting for lunch?" "Yep, we'll meet back at the apartment at noon," Dom said. Then, turning to me, she asked, "You ready to go talk to Brossard?" "Let's do it." It was convenient that my first class this morning happened to be with the same professor who had lied to me about the tablet just a few weeks earlier. Since he was Driscoll's former colleague and partner in the archaeological sites, I had some insider tips now for how to handle the man. According to Driscoll, Brossard was a bit of a coward. Driscoll wasn't surprised at all that he had pretended not to recognize a tablet. Brossard was afraid of the curse. Dom and I took the steps up to our classroom building, and as I reached for the door, the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. "What is it?" Dom asked, sensing the tension that had just come over me. "I don't know." I looked over my shoulder, scanning the sidewalks and trees around us. Groups of students, both keepers and mortals alike, moved in pairs and small groups, chattering and laughing as they went about their mornings. Nothing seemed out of place. I just got the sense that somebody might be watching us. "I don't see anyone." Dom surveyed the area as well. "But let them look if they want. I promise nothing seems off at all." "Okay." I cast one more wary glance across the campus, then followed Dom inside and down the hall toward our class. Brossard was late, as usual. He wouldn't make eye contact with me at all through class, though he had to have noticed my new blue aura. He could ignore me during the lecture all he wanted, but I'd missed a week of school, and he had no choice but to talk to me after class. It was his job to help me get caught up with my assignments. "Ready?" I asked Dom as he finished up the day's lecture. She'd agreed to accompany me after class. I wanted to toy with the professor a little bit. There wasn't any new information he could provide that Driscoll hadn't already told us, but I hated to let him get away with a lie. He had no idea that I was the deliverer mentioned in the prophecy, so it didn't seem like it would hurt to let him know I discovered the meaning of the tablet. I didn't appreciate being lied to, and I wanted to let him know it, and maybe watch him squirm just a little. But our path down to the front of the room was blocked as soon as all the students stood to leave. The trio of Agarthian mean girls created a wall in front of me and Dom. "Looks like you had a little fun on your vacation, didn't you, Atlantis?" Camille crossed her arms with a sneer. She thought I'd been on a family trip. That was the rumor Gayla and Dom had spread in my absence. "Went and got yourself some powers, huh? Well, it's about time. Let's see what you can do." I glanced over her shoulder to where Professor Brossard was hurrying to pack his things and get out of the room. I didn't want to let him get away so easily, and I had zero interest in playing the mean girls' head games. "I need to talk to the professor," I said, ignoring her prodding. "Excuse me." The girls crowded in tighter, blocking my passage. "She said move, Camille. We've got stuff to do." Dom tried to push past the girls, but they were being especially obstinate this morning. "I want to see what the water girl can do," Camille said again. "She can certainly drown you if you don't get out of the way." The girls continued to bicker as I watched Professor Brossard pack the last of his things into his computer bag and cast a nervous glance in our direction. "Professor, I need to talk to you about my assignments," I called out over the girls' shoulders, but he acted as if he couldn't hear me. Driscoll was right. He was a coward. "I'm going to tell you one more time," Dom gritted through her teeth. "Get out of the way or—" I spread my arms and the girls went crashing into the tables on either side of our row. I hadn't intended to throw them out of the way so violently, but it was as though the power came from a different part of my brain, some subconscious area that didn't think through consequences, but acted merely out of emotions and a loss of self-control. I didn't even realize what was happening until it was done. Camille's mouth dropped open, and Dom turned to me with wide eyes. But I scurried past them toward Brossard as he reached for the door handle at the front of the classroom. "Professor!" He didn't spare me even the briefest consideration before bolting out of the room. "Gah!" A frustrated yell escaped me, and the Agarthian girls almost seemed to cower at the sound. Camille quickly regained her composure, however, and the other two girls followed suit. She tisked as I made my way up to the back exit, Dom hot on my heels. "You really need to learn to control that better," she teased. It would be a shame for the administration to find out you've been using your powers on campus, and with all these witnesses around." She gestured to her friends with a wicked grin. I ignored her, tugging hard on the door handle and causing it to swing open with a hard slam into the opposite wall. "What was that?" Dom asked as we scurried out into the hall. Her voice was a whisper. "I don't know." My words were shaky. "I just got so mad." "Well, you better get back to the apartment before you get mad again. They're right. You need to figure out how to control this. I'll help you get to the bottom of this after my next class. I'll call Sean and Devin, too." "Okay," I nodded. "But, Dom, before you go, do you have any idea why Professor Brossard was in such a hurry to get away from me?" She grimaced. "I'm not sure exactly, but there was one person on his mind as he hurried out of there." "Who?" "Rossel." Chapter 7. Dom was probably right. I needed to get home and get a grip on myself. But first I had to calm my nerves enough to walk in public without blowing people over with an indescribable power I couldn't control. A splash of cool water on my face in the bathroom helped only slightly. I studied myself in the mirror, squinting at the girl staring back at me. My eyes were still mostly blue, with the exception of that one slice of brown in my left iris. Other than my missing scar, nothing looked different at all. I didn't feel much different either. And yet I knew everything had changed. "Who are you?" With a deep breath, I studied myself and tossed my bag back over my shoulder. Everything would be fine. I just needed to get home until we could figure out what happened back there. But each step took me further from that sense of calm I tried to maintain. I couldn't quit thinking about what Dom had told me. Why would Professor Brossard be thinking of Rossel? Surely they weren't working together. Rossel wanted me dead, and Brossard had plenty of opportunities to hurt me. But he wasn't trying to get me alone or cause harm. He was avoiding me. Why? An unnaturally high-pitched giggle shook me from my thoughts on the sidewalk outside of the classroom building. I looked up to find the Agarthian girl with the wind power walking with an exaggerated sway of her hips, arms slung through the crook of Tate's elbow. Camille and the cat girl walked behind them. 4 sets of golden eyes glanced up as they approached me on the sidewalk. "Everly!" Tate dropped the girl's arm like a hot potato and stepped toward me. Her smile disappeared, replaced with a glare. But Camille stepped up to her side, her grin growing ever wider. "Ah, it's the water girl with the temper again." Camille placed her hands on her hips. "You better look out for that one, Tate." I ignored them, focusing my attention instead on the tall, handsome prince that stood before me. "You're outside," he said quietly. He stopped just beyond arm's reach. "I needed some sunshine," I shrugged. I was feeling a little blue after being cooped up for a week. The corner of his mouth perked up, and his eyes briefly grazed over me. "You still look a little blue. Need some company?" "Ahem." The wind wielder cleared her throat loudly over Tate's shoulder. His jaw tensed slightly before he turned to look back at the girls. "I thought we were going to grab some coffee at the Honey Pot." She pushed her lower lip out playfully, but Tate wasn't amused. "Sorry, Stella. We'll have to reschedule," he said. Stella. I'd have to remember that was the Wind Girl's name. "The paper is due tomorrow. We can't reschedule." Her glare hardened, but it was definitely focused on me, not Tate. "I'm not—" He stopped himself and took a deep breath. "I'm not going to be able to go right this second. You all go ahead, and I'll meet you there in a bit." Camille narrowed her eyes, and Catgirl literally bared her teeth at me. Their little hissy fits weren't doing much to improve my own bad attitude either. They'd taken the brunt of my power once already today. There was no telling what might happen, if I got angry again. "It's fine, Tate. We can talk later." I forced a smile and tried to walk away before my emotions got the best of me. But Tate jogged back up to my side. "No, that's just it. He paused as the Agarthian girls moved down the sidewalk toward the coffee shop. Stella flicked her wrist as they passed us, and a gust of wind blew my hair into my face. "Not cool, Stella," Tate called out. Their snickering carried on as they rounded a curve in the sidewalk. I was definitely frustrated, but I'd somehow managed to keep my reaction under control this time. They didn't get to me quite as much when I had Tate by my side. That was good. I was making progress. "Sorry about them," Tate grumbled when we were alone. We walked at a casual pace behind them, allowing the gap between us and the Agarthian girls to widen with every step they took. "It's fine. It's not your fault. Besides, Dom says they only act that way because they don't like seeing Agarthian guys talking to girls outside of your race. I'm sure it's 10 times worse when it's their prince who is doing it." I raised my brows at him. "That's probably true, though I'm sure you're used to other girls being jealous of you." "Me?" My cheeks warmed. He'd obviously forgotten who my beautiful roommates were. "I wouldn't say that's true." Tate paused and locked his eyes on mine. "Well, you should probably get used to it then." He grinned, and it took all my strength not to melt into a puddle on the sidewalk. He was just a guy, but I could not deny my attraction to him, especially when I remembered our bodies pushed close together in that linen closet. He jerked his eyes away and started walking again, breaking the spell he had on me. And maybe it was just a spell. He was a talented siren after all. But that wouldn't explain why he seemed just as rattled as I did. "I'm glad I ran into you. I was planning on swinging by your place later to talk to you anyway. There's been a request for me back home." "In Agartha?" He nodded. His kingdom of Agartha was a mythical place, somewhere deep under the ground, inside a massive chasm within the Earth's core. It sounded fake, like a story someone had made up long ago. But then again, my entire life seemed pretty unreal these days. Still, it was hard for me to imagine him living there. "What for? Will you be gone long?" "I don't know. They're not very forthcoming with these things." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I don't want to go, but the drama that'll get stirred up if I disobey the order isn't worth it. They want me there as soon as possible." "When are you leaving?" "First thing in the morning." My stomach sank. He had done his part in turning my aura blue. We had plenty of the pills left, and we really didn't need Tate for the next part of my journey. But that didn't mean I wanted him to go away. I was more disappointed to see him go than I would have expected to be. "Oh," it was all I managed to say in response. "Anyway, I just wanted to let you know so you wouldn't think I disappeared on you. But make sure you stay out of trouble while I'm gone." "I never get into trouble." He laughed. "Seriously, promise me you'll stay home, either at your place or Millie's until I get back." "When will that be?" "I can't say." "Then I can't promise." The truth was that I wasn't planning on staying inside long at all. As soon as Al came back with a location, I had every intention of marching down to talk to Russell, especially now that I knew he was involved with Brossard somehow. This situation with him just kept getting weirder, and enough was enough. "You could at least pretend you'll be safe." "I'm not big into pretending," I winked and patted him on the back. "Now go get to your Agarthian girls before they come and hunt me down to find you." He hesitated, unsatisfied with ending the conversation there. But thankfully he didn't push it any further. I was glad he didn't, because my emotions were all kinds of mixed up, and I couldn't be sure how or if my powers might reveal themselves again. "All right," Tate said. "Will you tell the others where I'm going?" "I will. And Tate?
Yeah?
You be safe too. Chapter 8. I peeled away from Tate, lost in my thoughts as I made the short walk back to our apartment. Rossel was up to no good. Rasputin claimed Rossel wanted me dead, and even Tate had admitted that his orders to extract my soul came from the Olympian seer. But the only reason I could come up with for why Rossel would care so much about me was that he knew something about the prophecy. If Rossel knew about the prophecy and the meaning of the tablet, it made sense for Professor Brossard to think of him. After all, the tablet was originally in Rossel's care. But how did he know I was involved? He knew I was a deliverer before I did. A vision. It must have been a vision. Gala had once mentioned that Rossel's visions came to life on canvas. He painted what he saw. It was why he'd owned the art gallery, and it was why the Olympian king kept him close by. He liked to literally see the future in painting form. And Rossel had seen me as a deliverer. He should have killed me on the spot that day in his gallery, but he didn't. He could have offed me that night on Gala's yacht when he'd warned me to stay away from her. But again, he didn't. He sent Tate after me instead. And though it was probably a false sense of security, I walked a little taller knowing that Rossel couldn't, or maybe just wouldn't, physically kill me himself. I picked up my pace, chin held high, anxious to get home so I could plan out exactly what I would say to him when I got him alone. But as I rounded a corner, I got the same sensation I had before class, that someone was watching me. I slowed to a stop, looking over my shoulder, up and down the street. Nothing seemed unusual. "What are you doing?" Al's voice called out in my mind. I startled and turned my gaze upward. He was perched on a metal flagpole extending outward from a building. "Al, it's just you! Thank goodness!" "Quiet. If people see you talking to an owl on the street, they'll call the authorities." He had a point. Maybe I could talk to him in my mind. I focused my thoughts, trying to direct them at the owl. I asked him if he'd found Rossel. "Why are you making that face? You look like you have gas. Stop it." I rolled my eyes. That didn't work. Obviously, I wasn't telepathic. "I'm going to the park." It wasn't far from campus, and I figured I'd have better luck finding a spot to speak privately with my owl there. Not to mention, he would look a lot less suspicious in a tree than he looked perched on a windowsill in Manhattan. Al flew ahead, and I joined him by the waterfall in Morningside Park just a few minutes later. "All right," I said, parking myself on a large rock. "Tell me everything. Did you find him?" "Not exactly, but I have to believe he's still in town somewhere." "Why's that?" "The place is crawling with Olympians, and they seem angry." "What? Why?" "Oh, wait. Claudia mentioned the annual convention coming up. Are they here for that?" "No, it's still a few weeks out." "What do they need then?" He flapped down to a lower branch a little closer to me. "I think they're looking for Driscoll. I wasn't sure at first, but after you left Millie's place, the activity really picked up in that area. I think it has to do with your aura." "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you were at Millie's house, Driscoll was basically invisible. I think your aura must have shielded him from the effects of the curse somehow. But now that you're gone, the Olympians have discovered him. There have been some bad-looking dudes sitting outside of Millie's place around the clock since you left." "Oh my goodness. You think they're just waiting to catch him?" "Possibly. Either that, or they're waiting to catch you." My heart raced at the thought. "I've got to find Rossel." "I'm sorry. I tried to find him. Really, I did." "I know you did, and I appreciate it. I'll keep looking. Until then, you might want to stay away from your aunt." He bobbed his feathery head and took flight. I stayed on the rock, watching until his white form disappeared behind the trees and back into the city. As my gaze shifted back to the waterfall, I felt a chill across the back of my neck again. But if Al was gone, that meant someone else's eyes were watching me from the shadows. I turned over my shoulder and struggled to keep my expression calm as I saw Osborne approaching. He cracked his knuckles, sneering like a bully from some 80s movie. "I always knew you were crazy, but talking to yourself in a city park takes it to a whole new level." "What do you want, Osborne?" He couldn't legally hurt me anymore. I wasn't fractured, which meant I was no longer a target for the hunters. "I want to help you. You're looking for Russell, huh? Well, wouldn't you know, he's looking for you, too." He'd overheard me talking to Al. Thank goodness he couldn't hear what Al said as well. "I'm sure that he is, but you and he both should know that there's nothing you can do to me now. I've got my full powers, or hadn't you noticed?" I gestured to my sides, showing off what I hoped he could see as a blue aura. I kept my spine straight, shoulders back, and prayed I looked more brave and confident than I felt. "Even full powers won't exonerate you from the law." "And what law have I broken?" Did he know about my meeting with Rasputin? Osborne stopped just a foot in front of me. We were both standing now, the water at my back, and the rest of the park laid out before me. There weren't many people out in the middle of a workday, but there were enough to notice if he tried to harm me here. I hoped they would notice anyway. "I don't know," Osborne shrugged. "And honestly, I don't care. The price on your head is good enough for me. Never seeing your face again is just an added perk." "So you expect me to just turn myself in for some unknown crime I never committed?" "That would be easiest, yeah. But I can use force if necessary." The logical part of my mind knew I should be afraid. My brain was sending out the red alert with lights flashing and sirens blaring. "Osborne bad, Everly run!" But there was a disconnect somewhere. My body didn't get the memo. No, my body was mad. The power that resided somewhere deep in my core wanted to fight back. How dare he follow me to the park? Who did he think he was, trying to take me captive? I was innocent. My fingers felt twitchy as the water at my back called to me, beckoning for me to wield it against anyone who might oppose me. Before I could think or reason with myself, my hands rushed forward, pulling the water from the pond with them. A small tidal wave rushed forward, focused on a single spot, one person. Osborne was knocked off of his feet as the water engulfed him. That's when I should have run, but my inner Athena wasn't done with him yet. The water splashed back into the pond, and Osborne growled from the ground, shaking dirty droplets from his hair. "That was a mistake." "You're right, it was." I placed my foot on his chest, kicking him back onto his rear as he attempted to stand up again. "It was a mistake for you to think you could take me so easily. Tell Russell he can come and talk to me face to face like a man." "Tell him yourself." Osborne thrust his legs forward like a ninja, jumping back to his feet in one graceful move. Then he was on me like a flash of light, snagging my hair into his fist and yanking my head back. "Sleep." The sound of 1,000 harmonies in his single word was the last thing I heard before my body went limp. Chapter 9. It smelled like Mama May's basement. That was the first thing I noticed as my awareness returned. But I wasn't back in Oklahoma, and this wasn't the storage room of my small town's favorite old widow. Keeping my eyes closed so that my captor wouldn't know I was awake, I tried to gather as many additional details about my location as I could. It was chilly, drafty, which meant a window was open, or perhaps we were just in a really old building. Street noise confirmed that we were definitely still in the city, though. My shoulders ached, pulled at an unnatural angle. My wrists were bound together behind my back, with what I guessed were zip ties. Another rope stretched across my stomach, tying me to what felt like a metal folding chair. My feet were on hard ground. Little light made it through my closed lids, so I lifted them just enough to sneak a peek of my surroundings through my lashes. I was in some kind of warehouse, dimly lit by dingy windows placed high on the filthy walls. The space was vast and empty. I was all alone. "You can stop pretending to be asleep." Scratch that. I wasn't alone. Unfortunately, Osborne was still here, too. "And you can stop pretending to be righteous," I spat back. "We both know how much you enjoy seeing me tied up like this." "I don't have to pretend." I scoffed, then gave a hard tug on the ties binding my wrists. The plastic cut deeply into my skin, but they didn't break. I tried again, yanking harder, and stifled a little yelp as the skin on my wrist broke open on the sharp edges. It shouldn't have been so difficult with my new powers. The ties back at Driscoll's lighthouse had broken apart like threads. "What did you do to me?" Osborne finally made his way into my view, sighing as he strolled past like he was enjoying a casual walk through the park. "I made you sleep. I trust you got plenty of rest?" He grinned, taunting me. I lunged forward, but the rope held the chair tightly to my backside. "Sit down," Osborne said. His voice was laced with glamour, and I had no choice but to obey. "I mean, what did you do to my powers?" My voice was like a growl through clenched teeth. Osborne wasn't playing fairly. If he got to use his powers, I should have access to mine as well. I thought I saw a brief flash of confusion in his features before he squared his jaw again. Perhaps I was imagining it, though, because he quickly shifted back into bully mode. "I didn't do a thing to your powers. You're just weak." I wanted to lunge again, but his glamour still wormed through my mind, forcing me to remain still. But one thing was clear. When it came to my powers, Osborne had no idea what I could do. And while a part of me wanted to rip off the binding on my hands and bring him down just like I'd done with the thunderstorm and the Agarthian girls, a bigger part of me knew my power would be more useful if it was kept a secret for now. So I would let Osborne think I was weak until it really counted. I didn't think he'd hurt me anyway, or else he would have already done it by now. "So what are you going to do with me then? Just leave me tied up here in this warehouse?" "Yep." He pulled a phone out of his back pocket and checked a message on the screen. "That's all I was hired to do. Looks like my work here is done, so I'll just be on my way. Good luck," he snorted. "You're gonna need it." My pulse quickened as he turned toward the rusted metal door to my right. My lips parted, and I stopped myself before calling out for him to wait. It wasn't like Osborne would help me even if I asked him to, and I certainly didn't plan on asking him to. Light from the alleyway beyond flooded in briefly as Osborne stepped out of the warehouse, but it was quickly blotted out by a tall, wiry, shadowed figure who took his place. The door slammed shut again behind the new man, and I instantly recognized the white knot of hair balanced atop his head. Russell glided toward me, his unique gait identifiable anywhere. He wore all black from head to toe, and I wondered briefly if he owned anything in any other color. Probably not. Nothing else would look quite as intimidating as the darkness against his pale skin and the shock of white hair on his head. Plus, it brought out the soul-sucking blackness of his hollow eyes. He was like a phantom, but this ghost couldn't hurt me. His only power was the ability to see the future. My new keeper's strength would certainly give me the upper hand if push came to shove. That's what I told myself anyway. Everyone needed a little internal pep talk now and again. "Miss Gordon." His thin lips pulled into a pout as he assessed me. He didn't look quite as excited to see me bound to this chair as Osborne had, but I suspected he was simply more skilled at hiding his reactions. I tried once more to break free of the ties around my wrists, but whatever strength my powers had once provided seemed to have disappeared. "Russell, what a pleasant surprise. If I'd known you were coming, I would have fixed the place up." I couldn't hide the sarcasm in my tone. It was a defense mechanism, and I hated it. My snark never packed the punch I hoped it would. It just made me sound immature. Russell wasn't amused either. "I thought we had an agreement. I asked you to stay away from Gala." "And I asked you to tell me where my mother is." He pursed his lips, neither confirming nor denying that he knew where she was. After a beat, he laced his fingers loosely together behind his back and began pacing before me. "Will you tell me where she is?" I prodded again. "No." "Will you at least confirm that she is still alive?" "No." "She's dead?" He paused, turning his hollow black eyes on me. "I will say no more about your mother." "What about my father?" I didn't know where the thought came from, but I had a hunch that if anyone knew about my father, it might be Russell. Russell stiffened, but continued pacing the dirty floor as though he didn't hear me, but I knew he had, and based on his reaction, I suspected my hunch might have been correct. Now I just needed to get the upper hand on him somehow. I gave another feeble tug on the restraints around my wrists, but it was no use. My powers had abandoned me. "I need you to leave," he said finally. His face had twisted into a strange mix of uncertainty and regret. "Gladly," I said. "Just untie me from this chair first, please." "I need you to go far away. You must tell no one, and you must never return." "Oh, like you tried to do with Driscoll?" He turned a hard gaze on me. "I know you cursed him to remain on an island in the middle of the sea. But don't worry, I rescued him. I delivered him to safety. You can't hurt him anymore. You can't hurt me either, can you?" I was going out on a limb, but it was all starting to come together in my mind. The pieces fit, but the puzzle looked a lot different than I would have guessed before. Russell began pacing again, so I continued with my hypothesis, trying to see what kind of reactions I might elicit from the old man. He was reluctant to tell me anything, but maybe if I guessed correctly, I would be able to see the truth in his response. "He knew about the tablet, so you hid him away. But now that I have it, you can't control him anymore. You can't control me either. My power is too strong. Is this why you tried to kill me before my power emerged?" He gave me no response. He didn't so much as glance in my direction. So I kept going. "It's why you wanted me to stay away from Gala, too, isn't it? If she got too close, you knew she could have a vision that would lead me to the truth. Well, you were right, Russell. I know the truth, and you can't stop me from what is going to happen now." "You know nothing," he snapped, and the fierceness in his dark eyes made my heart stop. In 3 long strides, he was standing inches from my face, and I fought to keep my breathing steady. I was terrified, but I wouldn't let him know it. "You are a child and a fool." He spat the words like they were on fire, then turned on his heels and walked away from me again. "You don't understand the finer balance of our world, and you will destroy it." "Maybe it needs to be destroyed." Russell whirled around, and a flash of silver glinted off of a blade in his hand. In the same breath, he flicked his wrist and sent the blade flying end over end, straight for my chest. Chapter 10. A scream built up in my throat. I felt it rise from my chest in slow motion, like a teapot about to boil over. And just before it erupted from my lips, everything stopped. The knife hovered before me in mid-air, an inch away from my chest wall. The hilt was a tarnished gold, ornate in design, with otherworldly creatures breathing swirls of fire from the pommel to the blade. Years of grime, probably centuries, had darkened the crevices between the glittering swirls. It looked ancient, but the blade was no more dull than it had been when it was first forged. And instead of a scream, a laugh bubbled out of me. Why was I focused on the design of the dagger that was about to kill me? My hyper-awareness and observation of detail almost overshadowed the fact that time had stopped once again. "Al?" I scanned all the windows of the warehouse, looking for my feathery friend and protector. I repeated his name, but there was still no answer. He wasn't here, which meant the power to stop time could only have come from me. But how? Was it something I could command at will, or just some built-in safeguard to protect me from certain death? I refocused on Russell, his body frozen mid-throw. His lip was curled in rage, but his eyes told another story. Again, I got the impression that he regretted something. Killing me? Or maybe not doing it before now? It didn't matter. He'd failed, for now, though I wasn't sure how long the time would hold for me. I leaned carefully forward, close enough for the rope around my midsection to meet the blade. If I touched it, would it fall from the air and stab me in the leg? Or would contact simply renew its original momentum, propelling it through my gut? I hoped neither of those options were the case. I really just needed it to stay in the air so I could use it to my advantage. "Please don't move," I whispered. Then I gently brought the rope down along the edge of the blade. Miraculously, the knife remained motionless in the air. I breathed a sigh of relief and did it again, moving my body up and down like some uncoordinated version of the chicken dance as I attempted to fray the rope. My thighs burned, held in a perpetual squat with the chair still stuck to my backside. But after just a couple of minutes, the rope broke. The chair clattered to the hard ground, the rope still attached to it. But my hands were still bound behind my back with the hard plastic zip ties. With a quick glance to ensure Russell was still frozen, I righted the chair with a foot, bumped it closer to the knife with my hip, then stepped onto it and turned around. The knife hadn't moved when I needed it to stay still, but now I needed it to move. "Will you please let me take you?" I felt like a fool speaking to the inanimate blade that was still frozen in time, but it did what I'd asked it to before. Maybe it would fulfill my wish again. I stretched my arms backward until I made contact with the cool metal side of the blade. Taking it between my thumb and fingers, I gave a little tug. Somehow again, the knife submitted to my will. The handle fell, and the edge of the blade cut into me slightly as I gripped harder to keep from dropping it. But a small cut on my hand was worlds better than an open chest wound, so I wouldn't complain. Russell was unmoving, still snarling like a statue across from me. I had to get these ties off as quickly as possible. My clock had to have been running out. This was the longest I'd ever kept time stopped before. I readjusted the knife awkwardly in my hand until I was able to twist the blade against the plastic around my wrists. It took about a minute of pushing and pulling the blade, but finally it cut through the ties. I immediately rolled my shoulders back to stretch my aching muscles, cracked my neck, then inspected the bloody cuts around my wrist from where the ties had dug into my skin. Thankfully, these new keeper powers would help me to heal more quickly. I'd always been kind of a wimp when it came to cuts, and this was like a paper cut on steroids. Knife in hand, free from all the ropes and ties that bound my movements before, I stalked over to Russell's frozen body. This was my chance. I could end him without a fight, without a struggle of any kind, and I probably should, considering he'd just launched a dagger at my heart. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt wrong, cowardly, and I couldn't forget that hint of regret in his eyes. Perhaps there was still some good left in his soul, and if not some good, there was definitely some information I needed to get out of him. Russell knew where my mom was hidden, that much I was certain of. And now, I wondered if he might know something about who my father was also. No, I definitely couldn't kill Russell today, not until I found out exactly what he was hiding from me. A faint pressure was building in my chest, like a string attached to my sternum was being gently tugged away from me. And somehow I knew this was my body losing control of the time-stopping trick. No. My voice was firm, but inside I was pleading. No, please, not yet. I just need a few more minutes. The pressure stopped, and Russell remained still. I knew I was pushing my luck, so without another moment of delay, I rushed back over to the chair and untied the rope from it. It was now in 2 pieces. I used one to secure Russell's hands behind his back, the way mine had been tied, and I used the second piece to tie his ankles together. It wasn't a permanent solution, but hopefully it would hold until I could figure out what my next move should be. I sat his lanky body into the chair and whispered to his lifeless face, "I'll be back for you." Osborne was next. Chapter 11. The pressure was already building in my chest again when I slipped out of the warehouse. The sun was bright, even in the shaded alleyway. It called to me, tempting me to seize this moment and just run as far as I could, far away from Russell and Osborne, and some ancient prophecy that I could never escape. But I was in too deep for that, and it wouldn't only affect me. There were other people's lives at stake now, too. Millie and my friends, Tate, and the man in the most imminent danger, Driscoll. I turned the dagger over in my hand, watching the sun play off of its gilded surface. The string tugging my sternum was at full force. I felt as though it would crack at any moment. With a deep breath, I raised the blade toward Osborne, who was standing guard right outside the door. It was imperative that I keep him still once time began moving again. I lifted my hand, and from the corner of my eye, I noticed another person who had frozen in place while casually walking past the alleyway on the street beyond. I couldn't risk him looking our way when the spell broke. I lowered my weapon and sprinted over to the young man. He stared at his phone screen, one foot lifted slightly off the ground. I took his shoulders in my hands and pushed him forward slightly. "Move along," I said. I'd expected him to remain stationary, waiting for me to drag his body forward past the alleyway. But surprisingly, his feet moved with my encouragement. It was like pushing a bicycle and watching the pedals move as the wheels spun. His feet walked, holding him upright, even as the top half of his body remained still. "This is so cool," I whispered to myself. Once he was fully past the alleyway, I ran back to Osborne and grabbed hold of the blade again. Raising it to his throat, I finally relaxed and planned out my words. My chest ached with the pressure of my power, but time was still stuck in place. How could I make it move again? What was I missing? I glanced back at Osborne, whose blank expression was fixed on the wall across the street. I couldn't just leave him here. Russell would sick him after me just as soon as he came to, but I didn't have anything to tie him up with either. I looked back and forth, up and down the alley. There was nothing but an old dirty sock laying crumpled against the wall across from me. Then again, maybe the sock could be of some use. I risked another 6 seconds to go fetch the dirty thing, and I was shoving it into Osborne's mouth when the string in my chest finally snapped. The breeze blew through my hair, rushing down the alley like a wind tunnel, and the sound of the city filled the air once more. Osborne's eyes grew into full circles, and his hands shot up to grab a hold of my wrists. I pushed the flat side of the blade against his neck and shook my head, a clear warning not to try anything stupid. "Hey, Osborne. Surprised to see me?" I couldn't keep my smile at bay. The look on his face was just too stunned. He must have believed I appeared out of thin air. Good, Maybe he'd think I had the powers of a messenger, teleporting through space the way Devon and my mom could. Look here, I will take that disgusting used sock out of your mouth on one condition. You will not use your glamour on me. The second I hear the sound of the siren's call out of you, I will flick my wrist and use Rossel's pretty little dagger here to carve that voice box right out of your throat. Am I making myself clear?" A look of pure shock flashed across his face, and he gave a little nod, barely moving against the knife I had on his skin. "Good. Don't make me regret this act of mercy." I gagged a little as the crusty sock crunched under my fingers, but I made good of my word and yanked it from Osborne's mouth. He snarled as a thanks. "Where are your manners?" I pushed the knife a little harder into his skin. "I can get the sock again if you'd like." Osborne didn't say a word, but his eyes could have torched me. "Easy there, killer. You don't want to push me. Now listen up. You are going to stop chasing me. You will not hunt me down anymore, or I can promise you the hunter will become the hunted. I've got Rossel tied up inside. He got testy with me, and I guarantee you he won't do it again either. I will not tolerate you two and whoever you work for inconveniencing me anymore. So run back to whoever is in charge of this mess and let him know I'm done playing his game. Tell Rossel, too. It's over." "You know," Osborne's eye twitched as he spoke, "I didn't actually care about what happened to you before. I was just doing my job. But now I hope they rip you apart. I'd like to see them try." I pulled the knife back from his neck and twirled the blade in my hand. It was showy, not really my style, but something powerful had come over me. I felt invincible, and somehow Osborne felt it too. He knew not to mess with me. My inner Athena was showing. "What happened to you?" he asked. "I learned the truth." "Yeah, and what's that?" he sneered. "Ask Rossel. He can tell you all about what he saw me do in his vision." A muscle ticked in Osborne's jaw. I could tell he wasn't sure whether or not to believe me, but he knew there would be repercussions if what I said was true. Rossel was one of the greatest seers of all time. His visions were highly regarded as the truth in the Keeper world. Whether or not Rossel told him about me being the deliverer, the seed of doubt had been planted in Osborne's mind. He looked to the side, trying to appear unimpressed. "You'll find out soon enough," I shrugged. "And sorry, by the way, if you lose out on your reward for letting me get away." I dropped my voice to a whisper and grinned. "And I will be getting away." I tucked Rossel's blade into my waistband, no longer concerned about Osborne attacking me. I could practically see his fear radiating off of him now. He wouldn't dare make a move on me again until he talked to Rossel. The whole system is changing soon. I'm turning the world on its head. In fact, I highly suggest you work on getting on my good side." Osborne scoffed, and I quirked a brow at him. "Or don't. Makes no difference to me." I took 2 steps away from him before turning back over my shoulder. "Oh, and Osborne, don't let me see your face again unless you're coming to grovel at my feet. I won't be so gracious next time." I didn't look back again. My pace was steady and confident through the alley and back out onto the street. But as soon as I rounded the corner, a sweat broke out across my brow, and my hands shook. That was not Everly Gordon speaking back there. I would never have the guts to talk to Osborne that way. Something had come over me. It was terrifying, and yet I wanted more. I remembered the fierceness of the girl in Rossel's painting, and for the first time since I laid eyes on it, I believed it could actually be me. I ran, fueled by adrenaline, until I found a crowded cafe several blocks away from the warehouse. Only after I was inside, safely hidden by the other bodies in the room, did I pull out my phone. I dialed the first person who came to my mind, the only person I wanted to see. "Tate, it's me. Are you still in town?" Chapter 12. Tate bombarded me with questions the entire drive back to my apartment. His expressions had run the gamut from initial disbelief to rage to respect, and as we pulled up in front of my building, he held a half-smirk that wouldn't fade. "What's so funny?" I asked as we climbed out of his car. "Nothing," he chuckled. "You're just full of surprises." I'd sent messages to Sean and the girls during our drive, asking them to meet us back at the apartment. Devon was there as well, everyone waiting in our small living room when Tate and I walked in. "Everly, are you okay?" Dom scanned me the moment I crossed through the door, searching for any injuries. She frowned when she saw my wrists, but they were already healing. I would be fine. Then her frown morphed into an open-mouthed gape as she met my eyes and saw a flash of what I was thinking. Tate laughed again. "She's fine, but I'm not so sure about the other guys. Buckle up, you guys are in for a crazy story." I told them about how I'd run into Osborne at the park, but I didn't mention Al. For some reason, it still felt as though our relationship needed to remain a secret, which meant I didn't mention my previous life as Athena either. It all sounded a little too grandiose to be entirely believable, and it really didn't matter. What mattered was that Rossel was looking to get rid of me, and he knew about the tablet, though how much he understood of the prophecy itself was still a mystery. I told them about how I'd somehow stopped time, too. I described Rossel's attempt to stab me and then my threat to stab Osborne. It was all too much for Sean, who paced the floor as I spoke, running both hands through his hair. He looked like he might yell, or possibly jump right out of the window and hunt Osborne down himself. But I assured him that Osborne wouldn't be a threat to me anymore. I truly believed that. Rossel, on the other hand, I imagined I would see again soon. In fact, I counted on it. "How much of this did you already know?" Sean rounded suddenly on Tate, the accusation clear in his tone. "None of it. Rossel asked me to hunt Everly. He warned me that she was fractured and she was dangerous. He said he needed a skilled hunter to counter her and to take her soul the moment her powers emerged, before she could do any real damage. The orders came from higher up, and that's all I know." Dom kept a scrupulous eye on Tate as he spoke, and I wondered what else she was gathering from his mind, but she didn't push him any further. "Hang on," Gayla said. "I'm not surprised that Rossel knew about the tablet and the prophecy. After all, he painted a giant portrait of you, Ev. We really should have put that together a long time ago. What I'm more interested in is this time-stopping ability you have. That's not typical." They all turned to face me, as though waiting for me to explain myself. I just shrugged. I don't have much control over it. In fact, I didn't even think I was responsible for it the first couple of times it happened. "It happened before?" Dom leaned forward on her knees. "Yes?" I told them about how everything seemed to slow down before Clayton ran me over in the parking lot, and how I froze mid-air just before my real powers emerged at the loading docks when I was running from Osborne. Tate frowned, disappointed that this was the first he'd heard of it, even though he was there that day. "But I can't make it stop on my own. It only seems to happen when my life is in danger." "Fascinating." Dom leaned back again, nodding slowly. "Do you think I can learn to control it?" I asked. "I mean, surely there are others like me. Could they teach me, maybe when we go to Atlantis?" Sean shook his head. "I've never heard of an Atlantean being able to stop time before." "I've never heard of anyone being able to stop time before," Gayla added. Surely that couldn't be true. I looked at the other faces in the room. Gayla was grinning, and Devon looked a little confused. The rest were all examining me, like I was something from another planet. "There is a folk tale," Dom frowned. You've heard of the god Kronos? He wasn't real as far as the Keeper history books go, but there are plenty of stories of him that have floated down through the years. Many refer to him as Father Time. But he was an Olympian in the stories, Gala said. I know, but they're only stories. If it was true, I suppose he could have been Atlantean just as easily. The mortals who passed the stories along wouldn't have known the difference. Huh. So I might have been both Athena and Father Time in my past lives? I'd have to ask Al about that the next time I saw him. This was all getting too weird. The others were still staring at me, and I was growing more uncomfortable by the minute, so I stood and changed the subject. Who knows about the time thing? I'm still not entirely convinced it's anything more than a fluke. But what I'm really concerned about is Driscoll. I definitely said too much to Russell. I got caught up in the moment and basically confirmed that we had him. I'm worried that Russell will try to retaliate. I can't let him hurt Driscoll, and I don't want him creeping around Millie's place either. I vowed to keep Driscoll safe, so I think it's time we move him. You're probably right, Sean said. But where can we take him to keep him safe? Millie suggested Port Amaris. Unless you think of a better idea, I'd say we should go with that. I can take him there. Devon looked like he'd already made up his mind. I nodded. I'll go too. But we can't follow you there, Dom said. I can. Sean stood. We've got to head into Atlantis anyway, right? He grinned at me. Indeed, that tablet isn't going to piece itself back together. Are you sure you're ready for that? Tate asked. His eyes had darkened slightly into a deep, warm hue of gold. I don't want you to put yourself in danger. I hate that I can't go with you. I have Sean, and I think I accidentally moved the game forward, whether I'm ready for it or not. Our jig is up with Russell. He knows that we know about the prophecy. Now it's just a race to who can find the missing pieces first. I'll see if I can slow Russell down here, Gala said. I'm supposed to meet him for another training session tonight. I doubt you'll be training with him anymore, Dom said. Not now that he knows you're on Team Everly. I'm sorry if I messed up your apprenticeship. I put a hand on Gala's shoulder. She grinned wider. I can only pray that you did. I've never wanted to be a seer for the king, and I'll be happy if I never see Russell again. But first, of course, I'm going to at least try to discover what he's up to, and like I said, I'll do whatever I can to throw a wrench into his plans. And I'll look for another piece of the tablet while I'm in Agartha, Tate added. I'd forgotten that he was preparing to leave us. Dom shifted uncomfortably, and I wondered again what she knew that she wasn't telling me. Could Tate be trusted to handle a piece of the prophecy, or would he try to destroy it, the way his ancestors had tried to do for centuries before? I suppose there wasn't anything I could do about it at this point. He knew it existed. He'd either find it or he wouldn't. I just had to believe that he would do the right thing. He stepped toward me, and it was only then that I realized I had been staring at him. It was like he knew just what I was thinking. He reached out and moved a piece of hair from my face, his fingers making my skin come alive where they brushed against my cheek. You can trust me. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. Ahem. Sean cleared his throat loudly, shaking me from my stupor. Darn Tate and his perfect face. Right, I said, shoving my hands into my pockets. Gala and Dom can stop Russell if possible. Tate can look for a missing piece of the tablet in Agartha, and Sean and I can look in Atlantis. But first, we need to get Driscoll to safety. Everyone nodded, all on the same page. It was go time. Chapter 13. I said goodbye to Tate and the girls, then headed back to Millie's house with my Atlantean friends. It still sounded strange in my ears to admit that I was a descendant of Atlantis. But seeing as how I could breathe underwater and stop time with my mind, it had to be true. I scanned the streets carefully as we pulled up in front of Millie's place. Al had mentioned bad-looking dudes hanging around, and I wasn't sure how much fight I had left in me after the encounter with Russell and Osborne earlier, but I didn't see anyone. Perhaps my message to Osborne had gotten through to Russell and his crew after all, though I wouldn't hold my breath. "Millie?" No one greeted us at the door. Jeeves and Pierre must have gone to the market or something. It was unusual for both to be gone at the same time. I called my aunt's name one more time. "Something isn't right," Devon whispered. Sean marched past us through the foyer and up the stairs. "Let's go see." Something shifted in him, and he appeared bigger, stronger before my very eyes. This was Guardian Sean, and he wasn't happy. Devon and I followed him up the stairs. My heart raced faster with every step we took, dread pumping through my veins. Devon was correct. Something felt really wrong. The door to Millie's study was closed. I gave a soft knock. "Millie, are you in there?" No response. Sean was at the end of the hall, peering into Driscoll's room. He glanced back to us with a frown and shook his head. Then he held up his hands for us to step back and prowled over to the door. He moved Devon and me to the sides of the doorway, placing us flat against the wall. Then he twisted the knob and immediately dropped to the floor as the door swung open. It was a good thing he did, because Millie's heavy iron bookend came flying straight to where Sean's head should have been. It sank into the drywall across the hall, marring the wall. The color drained from Devon's face, leaving his dark skin an ashy gray as his suspicions were confirmed. Millie was in danger. He disappeared in the next instant, teleporting inside the office to his soulmate's side. I peeked around the corner to find several books hovering in the air off of Millie's bookcase, and one by one they went flying toward Devon. "Telekinetics," Sean said. "Stay out here. I'll take care of them." He ran into the room, a flash of speed before my eyes, and batted down the books in midair. He lifted the sofa in the center of the room and tossed it back into the corner like it was made of styrofoam. It flew through the air toward two Olympians, who I'd just noticed off in the shadows. One was a short man who let out an angry roar at the furniture. The other was a tall, wispy-looking woman with sharp cheekbones and a ferocious glare. She raised a hand, and the couch stopped in the air, then reversed its path back toward Sean. "Look out!" I shouted, and my feet were moving before I could think better of it. I dove to protect Sean, but he swept me behind him with one arm and took the brunt of the impact of the couch for the both of us. It simply bounced off of his hard body, and it struck me how valuable having a guardian like this really was. I'd taken Sean for granted. Trusting that he could handle the Olympians on his own, I turned to examine the others. Devon was working furiously to untie the ropes binding Millie and Driscoll to her heavy oak desk. Millie's eyes were wide, but Driscoll didn't look afraid. He'd been expecting this, I realized. He believed his time was short, but I'd made him a promise, and I wasn't going to back out on it now. I rushed over to help Devon. "We've got to get out of here. Do you think you can take us all at once?" I asked. "Probably." He scowled over his shoulder. "But we need to do something about these guys first." I followed his gaze to where Sean was still putting up a really impressive fight. The Olympians both appeared to be telekinetic. They could lift and throw objects in the room with their minds. But their brain power was no match for Sean's strength. He swatted their efforts down like bugs, stalking closer to them with every attack they sent his way. I thought Sean would take them out for sure, until his feet lifted off the ground. The Olympians were working together, their hands lifting in tandem as Sean rose higher and higher from the ground. "Put me down!" he shouted. It wasn't easy. I could tell by the quiver of the woman's hands and the strain in the man's face. They were struggling to keep him in the air, but it was effective. Devon cursed under his breath. "Hang on," he whispered. Then he stepped through the fabric of our reality and re-emerged beside the Olympians. He swung a fist, making contact with the man's nose with a sickening whack. Sean dropped a few feet in the air, his body falling sideways, but he didn't hit the ground. The woman was visibly shaking as she worked to keep him in the air on her own. The man swung back at Devon, but he'd reappeared by my side before the man could make contact. His fist whiffed through empty air. "Get the window," the woman said through gritted teeth. Her squatty little sidekick did as he was told, slamming the window open with a quick flick of his hand, and so much force I was surprised the glass didn't break. Then his arms were extended back toward Sean, assisting his partner by lifting the other half of my friend's body. They were moving Sean toward the open air outside the window. "I don't think so," I growled, and lunged for the Olympians. As I leapt over the fallen couch, I felt a gathering in my chest. The sound of the city street stopped coming in from outside. Sean's heavy breathing went silent, and best of all, the Olympians were no longer moving my friend toward the window. Time had stopped again. But this time, I could feel the pressure in my chest immediately. I didn't have long before that delicate string of power would snap again. I'd used too much already today. Instead of attacking the Olympians, I decided to use what remaining strength I had to rescue Sean. I wrapped my arms around his calves and pulled him closer to the ground. "Sean, can you hear me? Snap out of it! I need you to move!" Sean didn't respond. It wasn't a surprise, but it was a little disappointing to find the limits of my ability. This sure would have been a lot easier if I got to choose who was affected by time stopping. I pulled him again and again until his feet were on the ground. Then, as I did with the stranger on the street near the warehouse, I attempted to push him forward toward Devon. Thankfully, the foot-pedaling walking trick still worked. The pressure continued to mount in my chest as I truly stretched the limits of my power. A groan escaped me as I fought to keep time stilled, just for a little longer. Rossel's blade was still in my waistband, and I used it to cut through the ropes binding Millie and Driscoll to her desk. Then I gathered us all into a circle, clasping everyone's hands together as I went. I was almost finished when the string snapped and time moved forward again. "What?" Millie started, but I interrupted her. "Get us out of here, now!" It only took Devon half a second to register what was going on, and next thing I knew, I was submerged into the most frigid, stinging cold sensation imaginable. I didn't think I'd ever get used to the feeling of teleporting. It took my breath away, freezing my lungs, and then it was gone. Chapter 14. I surveyed my people first, counting faces to make sure everyone had arrived safely. We were all here. Then I leaned back to examine where exactly here was. We stood on white sand near a rocky outcrop of an island. The water was an impossible turquoise, stretching out to reach the hazy blue sky above. "Porta Maris," Millie whispered. "It's beautiful." I turned to find tropical trees dotting the island at my back. There were no other people around, no roads or buildings, just paradise. "This way!" She marched toward the rocks, which towered about 2 stories overhead. "Are you all right, Sean?" "I'm great." He gave one nod. His shoulders remained tense, his expression flat, but he was in one piece. We all were. The only person who seemed unwilling to follow Millie toward the rocks was Driscoll. In fact, he was downright stubborn about it. When we all started walking, he sat in the sand like a toddler preparing for a tantrum. I turned back for the old man and extended my hand. "Come on." "No." He scrunched his nose, and his white mustache wiggled in the sunlight. "Driscoll, please, I want to keep you safe." His brows furrowed. "Just because the Olympians can't get me here, it doesn't mean I'm safe. There are other dangers out there, more than curses and royalty." "I promise nothing will happen to you here." "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep." Driscoll huffed and rose back to his feet, brushing the sand from his backside. He didn't say another word as he fell into step beside me. A moment later, we were back with the others. "I love you, but there's something you need to know," Millie said, turning to Devon. "I'm going to ignore you when we get inside. I will essentially pretend you don't exist. You can't let them know about our connection here." "Why not?" he asked. The poor guy's feelings were hurt, and it was written all over his face. "There isn't time to explain everything right now. Just trust me on this." My aunt took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, then pushed her hands into a crevice of the rock. The stones moved apart, revealing a narrow stairwell. We followed her down just a little ways before the space opened up again into a seaside tavern built into the cliffs. Atlantean men and women sat at a long barred top overlooking the water. An older man with muddy brown hair looked up as we entered, settling on Millie with a cruel smile. "Mildred, I never would have expected to see you here again." "What exactly is this place?" I whispered to Sean, as others in the room turned to see the exchange taking place between Millie and the Atlantean man. "Port Damaris. The island isn't governed by any organized body, and it offers asylum to all Atlanteans. As long as they remain here on this island, they are safe from the laws of the Keepers." "Right, that's why Driscoll will be safe here." Sean's gaze hardened. "Driscoll will be surrounded by all the other Atlantean criminals and misfits who also seek asylum." Oh, suddenly it seemed a little less appealing. "I'm not here for a fight, Tano. I'm just dropping someone off," Millie said. She stood tall, putting on a brave face. Tano's eyes grazed over our crew, skipping right over Sean, Devon, and me. He squinted at Driscoll. "The old man?" Driscoll made a humph and crossed his arms over his chest. "Yes, see to it that he isn't harmed." "Why would I care what happens to him?" Tano smirked. "Because you owe me one, and you know it." Millie's voice was hard. It didn't sound like the gentleness of the aunt I knew and loved. "Oh, come on, Millie. It's been over 100 years. When are you going to forgive me?" "I don't forgive murderers." She turned her head slightly, but didn't make eye contact with Devon. "Especially not those who kill my soulmate." Devon tensed beside me, but I had to give him credit for remaining calm. He was doing much better than I would have done in his situation. Tano paused for a moment, then let out a loud, barking laugh. "You need to relax, Millie. Let bygones be bygones. Your soulmate will be back one day, and hopefully in a smarter body. And as for the old man," Tano waved Driscoll off, "I don't see why anyone would care a lick about him. Look at him. He's harmless." A pent-up breath escaped my lips. They didn't know who Driscoll was then. I could only hope he would be able to stay anonymous. "Good." Millie remained remarkably in control of herself. "Then there's one more thing. We need a couple of rooms, probably just for one night. They'll be going under to Atlantis tomorrow." She dipped her chin toward us. "And I'll be heading home. But tonight we'll need somewhere to sleep." "That's gonna cost you." Tano licked his chapped lips. Sean had to grab Devon's arm to keep him from hitting the man. Tano looked over to see what the movement was all about, but Millie reached out for his shoulder, drawing his attention back to her. "Just show me to the kitchen," she said. "I'll get right to work." Devon relaxed, and we followed Tano through the crowd to an archway behind the bar. A short hall led us back to the kitchen, where Millie seemed to make herself right at home. She went straight for a pantry and emerged with a couple of aprons. Tano seemed satisfied with that, and after another minute or two of mouthing off to my aunt, he left us alone. After a few more minutes of Millie rummaging through cabinets and drawers, she had a stack of ingredients on the counter. She put her hands on her hips and turned to me. "Driscoll will be safe, and you'll be off to Atlantis by morning. But right now I need your help." I didn't know what lay ahead, but I trusted that Millie had it under control. And finally, after a very long day, I leaned into the hope flickering inside. With a guardian by my side and a warrior goddess somewhere deep within me, I knew we were going to be successful. We would reach Atlantis, find a missing piece of the tablet, and eventually carry out the prophecy. But first, we had some work to do. This has been Fractured Lies, Daughter of Sea and Sky, Book 3, Part 1.